So welcome to Unit 1, Module 4, Effects in Ear Sketch, Lesson 3. Today we're going to talk about envelopes. Now envelopes allow us to add effects to smaller portions of the track. So rather than applying our effects like volume or reverb to the entire track, we can choose portions of the track that we want to apply to, and we can also choose at what level we want that to apply to. So let's take a look. So here's an example. Envelope for volume, in this case, starts here at very low and then increases to normal or regular full volume of this particular song right here. So what we do is we take a pair of points. The first one would list the starting value and then the measure at which we're going to start at. The second one would list the ending value and then the measure that we're going to end at. So this would start at -60, which is -60 decibels, which is something we can't hear. And it would proceed for one measure all the way up till it got to measure 5 at -10 decibels. So the computer fills in all the space and draws a line and makes the volume increase as we go through that. So how do we make that happen? Well, in set effect, it turns out we've only been using the first 4 parameters: the track number, the effect name, the effect parameter, and the start value, which is the default value or the value that we wanted to affect the sound by, whether it was the reverb or the volume. We would just put in one number. Well, now it's not just the value for the whole track, it's the value that we want to start with. And then we can set the start location, which is a measure or a fraction of a measure. We could do measure 1.5 if we wanted to. And then the end value and the end location. So we can choose where to start and stop the effect of this. Now, this has a very important computer science application in terms of general computer science knowledge. This is called polymorphism, where we have a method that does something different depending upon the parameters that it has or the arguments that are sent to those parameters. Based upon that decision, the computer takes that signature, or the number of parameters and the type of parameters, and decides which of the methods it should use. Now, in terms of our vocabulary here, that is called method overloading, when the code gets to decide which version of the method it should be using. And there is in code somewhere in the library here, there is a version of this set effect function that has just 2 parameters. And then there's a version that has 3 parameters. There's a version that has 4, there's a version that has 5, there's a version that has 6, there's a version that has 7. So each of these different versions are written in code. And as a user, you wouldn't know that. You would just see, okay, I'm going to use the set effect. The computer would then take the number of parameters you put in and match that signature with the correct block of code and use that to execute. So we don't have to worry about choosing a variable or a function and say, well, this time I want to include the start value. So maybe that would be set effect 1. And then this time I want to include the end value, and that would be set effect 2. Now those are all optional parameters, and the computer uses the signature, or in other words, the number and type of parameters that are listed here, to decide which of these different versions of the function it should use to execute what we want it to execute. So we're going to use set effect and add in these extra parameters to affect the envelope. So here is an example in Ear Sketch. We have our fit media, which is setting up our, let's say, our lead guitar in this case, and it starts at track 1, goes from measure 1 to measure 9. Then we're going to set the effect of the volume to gain, and we're going to set it to -60, which is 0. There's no sound there. And that's going to start at measure 1. But then, when we get to measure 3, we're going to set the volume to 0, which is full volume of the track. We can actually go all the way up to plus values, which would be overdriving the sound, and it would be louder than the original version. So we don't necessarily want to do that. Typically, we stay on the negative side of the decibels. Here's what that sounds like. can see it started out quiet, and then got louder and louder and louder. See, it started again. So the set effect allows us to add in these extra parameters that we didn't have before. We added in 3 more parameters. Normally we just have this extra value. But if we didn't include that, there would be a default value for that. In fact, if we just set effect 1, volume, that alone would work. That would be enough for the computer to use that function. There is a version of it that only takes 2 arguments to be sent to the parameters. So in terms of volume is related to loudness, which is the order on scale from quiet to loud. So we can take the volume of the current song and pull some of that sound out until it's silent. When we increase or decrease the volume, that's called a fade. So in the previous example, we faded the song in. This is also shows up inside of video editing, where we can add an effect and we can fade the effect in over time. So envelope doesn't just apply to sound editing. The other type of effect that we're going to look at is called filtering, and this is the process of removing certain sounds. Specifically, we're going to remove all the high sounds because this is a low-pass filter that's built into EarSketch. So we can choose the cutoff frequency, and the frequencies go from 20 to, I believe it's 20,000, because that's the range of human hearing. We can't hear any other frequencies other than that, and we can pick and choose which frequencies that we're going to cut off at. In other words, which frequencies we're going to allow the person to hear. So I'm going to use a video that someone else did in order to explain to you a little bit better about what that sounds like when you mess with volume and frequency in a low-pass filter. So in Blackboard, the first volume video that you're going to look at is video, volume, and filter. So right after you're done watching this video, watch that video. See you in a couple minutes.